in a time where our country is more diverse than ever and more divided than ever.
What is the gospel? This isn't just good news for us, it's good news for the world.
And so when we care for the world, we care for issues that impact the world.
When we study the Gospels, we learn about Jesus' favorite themes. And clearly his favorite theme was God.
The only way you really discover the good stuff of the kingdom is when we let God break apart our mediocre assumptions.
For too long, we've preached a cross that is too small.
We want the Word of God to be proclaimed in a way that people can listen and be changed for His glory and the building of His kingdom.
Welcome to this Seminary Now live event. Seminary Now is a streaming video platform delivering exclusive theological and biblical and ministry courses from a diverse group of professors and authors. I'm Becky Castle-Miller with Seminary Now, and it's a pleasure to introduce our teacher this evening. This is Nikole Lim, and her Seminary Now course is based on her InterVarsity Press book, Liberation is Here. So this event tonight is brought to you by Seminary Now and InterVarsity Press. Nikole is a documentary filmmaker. As she worked to tell the stories of women around the world, she realized the extent of the effects of sexual violence, and she wanted to do more to support women. So she eventually started a nonprofit called Freely in Hope. Nikole, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Becky. It's good to be here.
Now, Nikole's course was one of the first ones that I worked on with Seminary Now, and I was thrilled to see this content going up on our platform because I've also done a lot of advocacy work around defending women who are abuse survivors. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Nikole tonight. I just found out that Nikole is actually in Hawaii tonight while I'm in snowy Chicago, so I'm jealous. How is the weather where you are?
Oh, it's beautiful as always. I will give you some warmth. If I
Thank
could.
you. Yes, I'm already ready for winter to be over here. Nikole's course on Seminary Now, as I said, is based on her book, Liberation is Here, published by InterVarsity Press. And I loved Nikole's book. It's beautiful. It's artistically gorgeous, as well as having impactful content. And her Seminary Now course is the same. It was really fun to work with her on the course because she's a filmmaker and she has an eye for it. And she let us use some of her footage in our course. So our video team recorded her teaching, but we also were able to cut in some of her beautiful documentary and poetic footage that we use in the course. So it's visually beautiful as well as being really powerful, life-changing content. Nikole, for those who haven't seen your course and who don't know your story, could you share a little bit about your life and what led up to you becoming the advocate that you are today?
Yeah, thank you, Becky. I feel like this journey has definitely been lifelong, where in my previous work as a documentary filmmaker, I was exposed to a lot of really horrific stories from around the world, a lot of which centered around the stories of women who were being oppressed by culture, by religiosity, by family systems, and oftentimes even by themselves based on what other people had told them. And in that work, I felt that simply sharing a story and taking a picture of the story and creating a documentary around the story was insufficient. I was confronted with many stories from survivors of sexual violence that asked for something more than just the story, that they could get support to actually go beyond the story. And so a lot of what the girls that I was meeting, a lot of their dreams was to go back to school, because in a lot of the countries that I was working in, Kenya and Zambia primarily, girls are not as worthy or as important as the boy child. And so their education would not be funded by their families, especially by families living in poverty, where it's already difficult to feed these families. And so when I was hearing that a lot of these girls just wanted to go to school, it really shook me up, because in my family culture, school is imperative, school is mandatory, and my parents and family system as well really supported my dream in helping me establish whatever dream and career I wanted to do. regardless of my gender. And so, because I was raised in that type of cultural family system, hearing stories that were not like mine really challenged the way that I was doing my international development work at the time, to the point where I realized that simply capturing the story was insufficient. And so from there, I was really stuck in trying to figure out, how do I hear the story, present the story to public audience, but then where is the compassionate action piece that is actually listening to the stories in a way that's not just listening for the sake um, of apathy, but to actually listen and turn that into action where we could partner together and support the dreams of these girls. And so my very first scholar that we brought into our organization. So yeah, to backtrack quickly, I shifted my career from documentary filmmaker, started a nonprofit organization centering around the stories of these survivors that I was meeting. And one of our very first girls um, wanted to go to school to become a psychologist. We supported her through school, and as she was in school, she was able to learn the more technical tactics of mental health and how to heal her own trauma, going through therapy and everything. And then as she was growing in her own education, her her dream expanded beyond personal education to then advocacy and healing of trauma and clearing of oppression for children in her community. And so from that, I was like really also shocked by like, wow, this dream is beyond theirs. And I always wondered for myself, like, if I had experienced the same stories that they have, would I do that? Would I dedicate my life in service to others? Would I utilize my education to serve other girls in my community so that they don't go through the same trauma that I do? I couldn't say that I knew how, right? And so because I was so enamored by their dream to do just that, I knew that I needed to commit my entire vocation career to supporting their dreams because it was much larger than my own. And so for that particular girl, she was like, okay, I want to now help other survivors around the world, in my community first in Zambia and also around the world. And fast forward 12 years later, she not only has established multiple programs in Zambia, but she's now also in the United States working in anti-trafficking, still serving communities of survivors, both in her own community and also internationally. And so I think that's the beauty of um, observing the stories evolve into not just capture the stories, but to also be a part of advocating alongside of those same stories and seeing them come to fruition.
Wow. So you had a dream and a vision, but by empowering other women, this is so much bigger because each one of them is going to go out and impact another circle of women and just keep spreading that freedom. That's incredible.
Yeah, so in our program, so we're a relatively small nonprofit. We cap our scholarships per country at 20 girls so that we can really focus on their holistic care, healing, education, and leadership capacity. Through their leadership, we reach over, well, in pandemic and also, pre-pandemic, we reach over 5,000 people per year. So this is through
Wow.
the impact and capacity of supporting 40 girls, 40 survivors, and through their leadership, they're able to impact over 5,000 people.
It's incredible. Wow. What was the timeline for you? Like when in your life and like timeline wise, did you shift from filmmaking to nonprofit? When did you decide to write your book? Like how has that journey been for you?
Oh man, that's been a really tough journey, I'll be honest. So when I started Freely in Hope, I was fresh out of college. I was 21, didn't know what I was doing, but was just really compelled and enamored by the stories that I was hearing on the field. And so, because I started so young and without much foundation, both in terms of my experience and finances, I was still doing documentary work to fund the work that we were doing through Freely in Hope. And then I was able to transition after 5 years when Freely in Hope was 5 years old, and I was able to hire more staff members to support the project. We were at that time 3 staff members within five years in. And around that time is when a lot of my mentors were encouraging me to write. And with my background as a filmmaker, photographer, I'm like, I don't know how to write. That's not my forte. I went to school for something else. I'm more of a visual person. And one time I was actually sharing some of the experiences that I had with my uncle. Um, and it was in my experience of overcoming secondary PTSD, which I write a lot
Mhm.
about and also talk
Mhm.
about in the Seminary Now course.
Mhm.
And I was as I was telling him the story of um, my PTSD experience and the anxiety and depression and nightmares I was having, he was like, "Oh, that makes sense because you're a visual storyteller, that you would see it in this way."
Mm.
And so for me, that kind of clicked. It's like, oh yeah, I could see things that maybe other people can't. And the practice was then, how do I put to words the things that I'm visually seeing? And so from there, the journey started to open up where it was the possibility of, oh, you can write. Or you can't, you have the opportunity to write. Not that I
Mhm.
like felt like I could at the point. And
Mhm.
then as like it was kind of like marinating in my brain, my grandfather, who has published multiple books, um, one day out of the blue, he's active on Facebook, so he'll see like little things I post on Facebook, and he was like, our bloodline is full of photographers and writers, and I think you can write. And
Wow.
so that also gave me some courage, because if he's been able to publish multiple books and being his seed, and also respecting, the people that have come before me and the legacy that they've built before me, um, there was reason to try. And so as I started to kind of like think through creatively what it could look like, I started pitching the idea to the survivors that I had been working with for the past, at that point, yeah, 5 years ish, when I was full time with the organization. And they all gave me kind of that go ahead. And I think I needed also that blessing from them, because my story is informed by their story. And if
Mhm.
I'm going to tell my story, it did need to include the ways in which their stories have changed me and
Mhm.
challenged
Mhm.
me and transformed me. And I
Mhm.
needed that blessing if I were to then move forward. So the
Right.
process has been lifelong, starting with my grandfather for sure. And then the actual writing of it was, I don't know, 4 years or so.
Mhm.
So it's been quite a journey of learning and failing and learning again.
And I love that because you approached your book from like you didn't grow up studying writing and planning to be a writer, so you weren't coming at it from purely a writer's perspective. You did some really artistic work with the book, and made it really visually beautiful as well. So I just love that you were able to like take a cross-disciplinary approach, um, that someone from one perspective wouldn't have been able to bring. So I think that's a really
Oh, thank
neat
you. Yeah, and I think
feature.
that's also the gift of this course with Seminary Now, where because the platform is video, which is my forte, we were able to really collaborate with your team in a really fun and exciting way to create it together. And I think that's
Mhm.
also like, yeah, I love just collaborating on creative projects in that way. The book, as Becky is saying, has pictures of some photographs that I've taken throughout my work. Throughout, yeah, 20 years of documentary filmmaking. So as you flip through the stories, you'll also see images that help convey time and place for me
Mhm.
in that particular journey.
And you mentioned that you collaborated with survivors on writing the book, and you also did that on your course. So, what was the process with you and Jean collaborating in the course? Nikole has multiple sessions with her friend Jean, where they have a conversation and really share information back and forth instead of it just being like a one-way lecture. So, what was your process with her to come up with that approach to the Seminary Now course?
Yeah, so oh my God, like everything that I have done as I've built this organization is to ensure that it's survivor led, survivor driven, survivor centered, because I am not a survivor, nor am I from Kenya or Zambia. And so, being someone who has not had lived experiences of the culture or of the story and experiences and that level of trauma, um, I know that I'm not the expert. I see myself more as the convening factor, to bring the experts forth
Mm-hmm.
and to platform the voices of survivors, because I believe that they have the potential to become the most powerful liberators in our
Mm-hmm.
world. Oftentimes, the opportunity or the platform needs to be cleared for them. And so to invite Jean into the course was mandatory for me, because, again, I'm not the expert. So a lot of what we're sharing in this course is the lessons that I've learned because of her authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
her audacity to tell me the truth, especially
Mm-hmm.
when it was necessary for me to learn and unlearn, um, and for her to share her wisdom and insight for how do you advocate. I can't answer that question because I'm not the one that you're advocating with, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would be Jean. And so in conversation, you'll see us really digging in a very personal and challenging way, because it's not easy walking alongside of other people, especially when there's trauma involved, when there's egos involved, when
Mm-hmm.
there's different cultures involved. And so that dance and that challenge is actually what makes, I feel, our work in a relationship so beautiful and so
Mm-hmm.
transformative and reciprocal.
Mm-hmm. And that collaboration and survivor-centered approach is even reflected in the title that you chose for the course. It's not advocating for survivors, it's advocating with survivors of sexual violence. What does that shift in wording mean to you? Why is that so important?
Language is imperative. I don't know who said this, but I hear it a lot. Words create worlds. And so, if we can speak into existence, this is also biblical, right? If we speak into existence the things that we hope to see in the world, then ideally that shifts our intention and our posture toward that. I think one of the critical pieces as to why shifting our language is so imperative is because if we see survivors, especially in the developing world, as little people, little girls that need to be saved, need to be rescued, need to be coddled, need to be told what to do, then that diminishes their humanity and their inherent dignity. And so if we shift the language for advocating for to advocating with, and that shows a sense of agency in the survivor to
Mm-hmm.
actually tell us how do we best advocate? Because if I'm advocating for you, right, I'm telling you what I think is best. But
Mm-hmm.
the advocating with means that you're actually telling me what's best so that we can work
Mm-hmm.
together toward our mutual liberation.
Right.
Um, and that's really the goal of advocacy, is that we're not freed by ourselves. We're freed in context of community. Other people do not free us either. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
if we are freed in context of community, we must learn from others by centering those who have lived experiences and those who are most marginalized, because those are
Mm-hmm.
the voices that God always sided with as well.
Yes,
And so there's a
absolutely.
lot to learn. There's a lot to learn there in terms of changing our language, shifting our perception of the so-called other or the survivor. Even in using the term survivor was a choice.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of, I'm sure you've worked with a lot of organizations. There's a lot of more technical term, we'll say, like the abuse victim,
Victim, yeah.
trafficking victim,
Right.
rape victim, right? All of these words really pigeonhole people into being victims of their circumstances. And so saying survivor was a imperative shift that we made in the organization, that actually the survivors told us to do that,
Good, yeah.
because then it would then speak into existence something that was still evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of that work in languaging is calling to existence what we feel could be, and creating a bigger worldview from what we've seen it before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the course offers direct from the mouths of survivors wisdom for best practices, and not just based on their personal experience, but based on actual research and the education that they've gotten and that you've implemented, that you're teaching together. How can churches and organizations and ministries use this course as a training tool?
Yeah, so one of the things that we talk about in the course is 5 critical things that we feel all organizations must do and have to establish safety within their church, school, community, organization. And one of those things is to unlearn abuse. And so, what we feel this course does is it helps you unlearn a lot of the things that patriarchy, religiosity, um, yeah, culture has taught us to unlearn
Mhm.
that so that we can learn something new from voices that we may not have heard from before. And so this course, because it's done in tandem with Jean as a survivor, will definitely challenge you to think and to learn something new than what you might be used to. And I think that's also just really a representation of, right, the kingdom of God
Mhm.
with all of these diverse voices and experiences and
Mhm.
perspectives of what the kingdom of God could
Yeah.
look like.
Yeah.
And so I highly recommend this for all faith-based entities,
Mhm.
any really, because the statistic globally is that 1 in 3 women are survivors of sexual abuse. 1 in 6 boys
Mhm.
and 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls under the age of 18 are survivors of sexual
Yeah.
abuse,
Yeah.
right? And so if you think of that, a third of your congregation members, a third of your female family members could be, might be, probably are
Probably
survivors
are.
of sexual violence. Yeah. But
Right.
you don't know that because they haven't told you because you're not a safe person.
Right.
And so the more that we know, the more that we can be that sense of safety to care for and nurture and fight against fight against all of the oppression in our world to advocate with those who might be suffering in silence.
Mhm. I like to use the illustration when I'm talking to pastors and faith leaders to say, picture your meeting room, picture your sanctuary. And if you've got 3 seating sections in your sanctuary, one of them, like 1/3 of them, is full of survivors of sexual violence. And that's a cautious estimate. It's probably more than that, especially when you expand that to include other forms of abuse, like intimate partner violence, etc.
Correct. Yeah.
And so I see the light bulb go on for people when they realize, oh, I know people who are survivors. I don't know who they are, but I must know people.
Yeah.
Um, so that's so important. And like you said, every faith based organization should be doing a training like this because abuse is everywhere. As you and I were discussing before the live event started, is there a denomination or a Christian group that hasn't been hit by an abuse scandal and even covered up abuse? Um,
Right.
I can't think of any. It's tragically prevalent,
Yeah.
um, including in my denomination. I'm in the Anglican Church in North America, and there's a wonderful advocacy group called ACNA too that is doing great work to speak up for victims in my denomination. But I just saw on Twitter today that a priest was arguing that we shouldn't have a trauma informed approach because that, like, centering survivors is the opposite of finding out the truth. Like, finding out the truth is more important than centering survivors. So that kind of myth is still so prevalent, even in people who are good intentioned. What are some of the other myths about abuse and abuse survivors that you hear Christians repeating?
So in the same way, exactly that story of what you shared, it's your fault for getting raped. It's your fault for leading him on. It's your fault for dressing inappropriately, whatever that means, right? So victim blaming, placing the blame solely on the survivor is, I think, one of the common things that happens because sex and sexual violence is not talked about in the church at all
Mhm.
outside of submission. And when we talk about submission, that oftentimes includes sexual submission, which is rape, marital rape, right? And so when we think about it in that way, we've been trained, like women have been trained to deny themselves their rights in the church, and men have been trained to believe that they have the right and authority over a female body. And those are the myths that will continue to perpetuate sexual violence in your own household unless it's unlearned and undone, actively unlearned and actively undone. So I feel like this is what the course can help to um, kind of shake things up a little bit. It's a really good entry level to the work because then we also provide ways that you can tangibly put policies in place. There's many wonderful organizations as well that help churches go through that process. But you have to know what you're tackling before you can tackle the thing. And so a lot of the conversations that we have in this course is talking about these little myths that we so commonly will say. Um, Without realizing that that's creating so much harm on the survivors around us, and we don't even know it.
You've also brought up some really important things that advocates themselves should know before they enter this work because secondary trauma is such a problem, compassion fatigue, secondary PTSD, et cetera. Can you share a little bit about what people should know before they begin advocacy work about keeping themselves safe and healthy?
Yeah, in terms of keeping your safe self and healthy, I think before I get to that, I want to start with one of the key lessons of advocacy in general, um, which is to know that you are not a voice for the voiceless. That term implies that the so-called voiceless don't have a voice, but they do. It's just that we're not listening. And so the goal is to find where are the communities that have been deemed voiceless, and how do we then listen to it, leverage it, platform it, support it, fund it, amplify it, and allowing those voices to be heard. And then as the voices are being heard, those are the actionable steps then that we as advocates can partner with to take it to the next level and ensure that there is justice and healing and safe spaces everywhere. And so once you know that you're not a voice for the voiceless, the sense of responsibility, or often the saviorisms, that egotistical saviorism, can undo itself, and realize that this is partnership. This is active, compassionate partnership in tandem, and that there's work that you have to do personally in survivor care, and there's work that the survivor has to do personally in their own care, and that you cannot do it for it, but you can focus on yourself. You can heal yourself. You can find the ways in which your survivor complex is heightened and what triggers that, you know. And so I think as advocates are learning to enter into this space and work, the necessity to realize that every individual person has their own individual method of healing as well can help you find the ways that allow you to heal in the process of your advocacy work, so that the burden um, is not yours incomplete. It's shared.
hmm You've shared about your own journey with burnout and having to heal your own trauma. What were some of the like therapeutic methodologies and tools that you used to to heal yourself so that you could continue the work strong?
Um, there's been many. I would say the biggest thing for me has been practicing contemplative prayer, which in evangelical circles is not very common, and it wasn't known to me. And that became necessary because in wrestling through secondary PTSD, and also for those who have complex PTSD, um, words cannot describe the horrific experience. It's not adequate. So cognitive based behavioral therapy sometimes doesn't cut it, because you can't keep talking about the trauma. Instead, there are ways to still connect with body, mind, and soul in ways that are beyond talking, connecting with God through body, mind, and soul, right? And so that's what contemplative prayer and meditation did for me, is teaching me how to connect with God without the verbal piece. Because then we're only accessing one way of communication when there's actually a multitude of ways to connect and communicate with God. That's one. I would say the other thing would be to I surrounded myself with a community of folks that understood, both survivors and advocates, people who really understood um, the damage that caregiving can do to a person if they are not actively caring for themselves. Um, and then another switch that allowed me to continue the work after my experience of PTSD, where I was actually hospitalized in Zambia, is by seeing the courage and fortitude of survivors live another day, choose to live another day. And I felt like if they could experience everything that they have firsthand, and if I could experience what I've experienced secondhand, right? Looking to their lead and looking to their courage could allow me to live another day as well, and to try again, and to learn again, and to start afresh. So there's a lot of hard internal work of undoing what you know or what you think is possible, and embracing a more expanded mindset of who you are and who you could become in context of community, learning from the wisdom and courage of survivors.
Hmm. And I know that survivors can sometimes disconnect from their bodies, but you're talking about like somatic therapies and things that can help. What are some ways that survivors have shared with you that they've been able to reconnect with their bodies, the goodness of their bodies, the holiness of their bodies, just as they are, as they're healing?
Yeah, in our context, being in Kenya and Zambia, dance is a huge form of connecting with the body. Um, that has been helpful for some of our girls. Yoga is helpful. But I feel like in our cultural context, dance is probably the bigger one. Dance and singing, like using the voice in a way that's liberating and not performative, has been a really strong practice.
What are some things that church leaders need to be cognizant of if they're wanting to help their churches become safe places for survivors to heal, um, especially in the area of teaching? What are some like popular scriptures or Bible stories that have been taught in harmful ways, or Christian teachings that are harmful to survivors, that trigger survivors or shame them? How can Bible teachers and Christian leaders be more mindful and accurate and safe as they're teaching?
Yeah, so like an example that I mentioned before is the one on submission that always gets shared, right? Y'all got to read the whole chapter to understand that this is a story of mutual submission and ultimate submission to God, and submission to others, but not in a way that is violating our humanity and violating our inherent dignity. And so again, when we talk about submission and consent and allowing us to see each other as images of God in the flesh, it changes the way you will treat other people if you really saw them and believe them to be God in flesh, right? The Imago Dei. And so that is really the core. I would say, like, the first step to creating safe spaces is to see other people who are deemed as other, women, immigrants, LGBTQ communities, the marginalized, believing their story, seeing them as made in the image of God, and believing that their stories and experiences are true, and putting that at the forefront over what you think or what your friend said, because most likely your friend looks just like you, or what the leader might say, or the authoritative figure might say. And again, having that more diverse community of voices that are speaking into your theological praxis. And the second, this is actually one of the five steps that we talk about in the course. The second piece is to listen with empathy. A lot of times, folks will listen with sympathy, and that is very disempowering. And so the empathy piece, again, is that together with, suffering with, moving forward with, advocating with, and to listen to what the needs are, actually listening to what their needs are, the survivors' needs are, and together implementing that in tandem. And then the third thing is the unlearn abuse, which would be to um, actually look at those scriptures and try to see, like, am I reading this scripture and interpreting this scripture from the lens that I was trained in, or the lens from my personal experience? How would it be read by a woman, or by a survivor, or by an immigrant? It will, I guarantee you, it will sound different. And so that's what learning means. And then learning a new perspective. Again, trusting that the divine image of God is within each person, that they can interpret it in a different way, and that's actually okay. The fourth is to establish safety. So, as you're talking about how do we establish that safety, it's ensuring that there are safe practices embedded within the organization. Some of that is based on policy, like actual policy that's written and published. Some of it is shared statements, collective statements that the board or the leadership team will devise, and ensure that that is in a very prominent place within the organization, so that everyone knows what are the policies that protect them. And then another way of establishing safety is by iterating it through how the space is designed, by who is speaking on the platforms, by the type of language that's being used in the design process. That is also where um, people can feel safe or not safe. And the final thing is to speak out, to allow survivors to speak out, and to give them platforms to speak out and to share their stories in a way that is most conducive to them. And sometimes that might be unconventional, like maybe through art or through spoken word or through painting, right? There's ways to share your story that doesn't always involve telling the story of the trauma. And I think that allowing spaces for that creativity to be platformed allows us to experience a different side of what healing could look like.
Yeah, that's really practical and actionable. I have some more questions for you, but I want to let our audience ask some questions. So if you all want to take a moment and type the questions you have for Nikole for the last 20 minutes of our time together, and I'll give you a chance to think about that. And I'm going to ask Chaz to play the trailer for Nikole's course so that we can get because I want you to see it. It's beautiful. Just the trailer is gorgeous. So I want you to get a visual look at what that is, and then we'll come back and we'll have some more questions. So Chaz, if you have that ready, I will let you.
10 years ago, I was confronted with the reality of sexual violence in our world. And while working as a documentary filmmaker, I learned that 1 in 3 women are survivors of sexual violence worldwide. I realized that simply capturing the story was insufficient. The women that I met were inviting me into their audacious vision that equips survivors to not just survive, but to thrive. It is through their stories that I recognize that those who've experienced the most violent forms of oppression have the potential to become the most powerful liberators in our world, as leaders and liberators with autonomy and authority over their story. The Me Too movement has exposed the prevalence of sexual violence in our communities, and the church has remained silent for far too long. Rather than tolerating oppressive structures that undermine and silence the voices of survivors, we must choose a different pathway. As leaders of faith, it is imperative that we promote justice by establishing safe spaces that prevent sexual abuse and that support survivors in their healing. This course will equip you to advocate alongside of survivors, expand your perspective by learning from the wisdom of survivors, and also challenge you to fight against systems of oppression and establish new systems of liberation within your community. Together, we can build a world that is free of sexual violence.
It's such an important course. I really, as I said earlier, enjoyed working on it while being impacted by it. I mean, even though I've been doing advocacy work for a decade myself and pastoring survivors, I learned new things from it. It was really especially helpful to hear from Jean. Just on a practical note, so people know, the course has, I think, 11 sessions, and they're about 12 to 15 minutes each. And we have a workbook that goes with them that you could use as a small group discussion guide or a leadership meeting discussion guide. Or if you're studying it on your own, you can use the workbook to help you take notes and record the things that you thought were most important. And we've also got some journaling and reflection questions in there so you can process it, because it is heavy content. And so we gave some processing opportunities in the workbook. So if people are interested in using it as a training tool, it's really set up well to be used for leadership teams, personal training, ministry preparation training for volunteers, for example, that would keep your church safer, or for like a small group study or a Sunday school. And for those who missed at the beginning, just a reminder that if you share this live stream on Facebook, you will be entered to win Nikole's book, Liberation is Here, and your subscription to Seminary Now. And if you want to sign up for a subscription yourself, you can get your first month for $1. So I'm going to keep asking you my questions because there's so much more that I want to ask you. But again, if anyone has other questions, you can put them in the chat on Facebook or on seminarynow.com, wherever you're watching, and we will try to get to those as well. Nikole, what have you been up to since you released this course? What is Freely in Hope working on right now?
Yeah, so as we released the course, we also partnered with another organization called Made for PACS with the curriculum that goes actually in tandem with those 5 steps that churches can take to establish safety within their community. So that was this course, together with that curriculum with Made for PACS, was a very specific to faith communities. From a faith perspective, how can faith communities establish places of safety? Right now, we are working on expanding our mission of establishing safety now with children and with parents and caregivers who protect children. And so we are launching our very first children's book that was written by one of our survivor alumni from Kenya. Her name is Lydia Mattioli, and she came through our program as a university student. She was incredibly dynamic in her leadership and just really wanted to use her experience to advocate against sexual violence because her best friend was raped in the same community that she's from. And so, partnering with her best friend, she wanted to be an advocate. And so she started designing programs for high school students that teach them about safety and consent and mutual respect and preventing sexual violence. And as she was doing that work and also working with the scholars in our community, we realized that even though we primarily support girls that are in high school or university level, the majority of them were first sexually abused when they were children. And that made us also realize, oh, we need to start at an even earlier age than this high school curriculum that we're doing. And so from that, she started doing programs with children in her community, also in Kibera, which is the largest slum in Eastern Africa, to teach them on body autonomy and using the power of their voice and establishing safe adults that they can tell things to, and how to spot issues of like touching inappropriately or what is considered like a secret, right? And so by training children, she then realized, okay, in addition to training children, we also needed to train the parents. When the pandemic hit, we couldn't run our workshops in schools anymore, but we still needed to get this content out. And that's where the idea of writing the children's book came up. As she was writing the book and really delving into her experiences in her community to really source from experiences of the community for her book, she actually realized that she was also a survivor of child sexual abuse. And that was a story that she'd never told us before. And so in practice of establishing a really powerful product that will bring so much life-saving education to children and caregivers, she also was able to redeem her story in a way and to allow her story to be told through this book. And so this book centers around both her story and the stories of others in the community. It's called Pendo's Power. Pendo means love in Kiswahili. And this book talks about how she was able to utilize the power of her voice to prevent sexual abuse from happening to her friends. It releases in April.
I'm so excited about this. I've been following your work on it. I have 5 kids. 4 of them are girls. And so it's heavy on my heart to protect my own kids and to try to teach them about consent and bodily autonomy and protecting themselves and making noticing red flags in relationships. So I'm really excited about this resource as a mom, and as a church leader to implement this. So I can't wait till it comes out. If people want to back
Yeah.
this project or find out more about it, where should they go?
Go to our main website, freelyandhope.org. And we don't have so this is still like pre-announcement stuff because you're at the Seminary Now webinar. We don't have the launch date yet, actually. We're like right in the process of establishing it. So if you go to our website, sign up for our email newsletter, go to Instagram and Facebook, follow us at Freely and Hope. You will be the first to hear the announcement once we release it. And we will know the release date very soon, and we'll be showing some sneak peeks of what the book will look like.
Mhm. It's so important. I'm really, really grateful that you did that. That would that would make a great Seminary Now course in the future. Like, how do we protect children as
Yes.
well? How do we
Oh, we would love
educate
to do that.
children? Love to do that.
Yes. That'll be our
Um,
next course. You said it.
I love that. And I just wanted to give a content note now that I'm thinking about it. The course that you did is honest and it's tough content, but it's not graphic. So as I'm thinking about it, like how do I want to keep using your course myself in ministry? I think it would be appropriate for teens to watch. A teen group could absolutely watch this course. It's not graphic, it's not
Yeah.
inappropriate, but I think it would help them be safer in their relationships, and it would be a great course for youth leaders as well. So I think junior high, high school, college, this would be a really good course for them as well, not just for adults to
Absolutely.
watch. We've got a couple viewer questions. Will a recording of this event be available later? Yes, absolutely. It'll be on our Facebook page as well as on seminarynow.com in our live event section. So I would encourage you to share this with the leaders and other Christians and survivors and advocates in your life who need to see this introductory content in this live event, and share Nikole's course with them as well. Absolutely. And Rita asks, how difficult was it to start your nonprofit, and did you have sponsorships?
Yes, it was very difficult to start the nonprofit. I did not have sponsorships to begin. It was all just doing what we knew how to do, which for me at the start actually was premiering and selling the documentary film that kind of was the launch pad for the organization. So it started there, and we were gaining a little bit of income through people attending our events and people buying the DVD at the time. Those don't exist anymore, but you can also stream the documentary right now on Amazon. It's called While Women Weep. So that's how we started, and then as we grew, we started gaining more support from grants, and majority is individual donors giving between $30 to $100 a month. And that is what actually keeps our organization going, is monthly support from people who can give what they can and what they feel comfortable with, which really fuels actually the crux of our work, which is the holistic education piece. Holistic education for us is not just tuition, because I quickly learned in the very beginning that sending a girl to school does not make her safe. In fact, the trip from home to school, walking at wee hours of the night in the morning, if she's not living in a safe place, if she's not getting mental health care, if she doesn't have food to eat, if she doesn't have the resources to study well, all of those things can help keep girls safe. And so holistic care means that you're supporting education, safe housing, legal support, mental health support, counseling, and a community of belonging. And so our monthly donors, they're called Hope Circle members, literally encircle our scholars with the support that they need to thrive. And so that is really what keeps our organization going.
We've got another question from Sarah Klingler, and Sarah is an advocate herself. She works with a missionary kid advocacy organization because of so much abuse that's happened in mission organizations. Sarah asks, when many people look at the magnitude of the issue of sexual violence or trafficking, sometimes they wonder what they as an individual can do. They may have limited time and resources and may have no idea how to partner with or come alongside survivors. Can you speak to this and talk about what might be some practical steps that people can take?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you brought up trafficking. So we as an organization work in all forms of sexual violence, which includes trafficking. We also have a program that's dedicated to preventing trafficking with women in prostitution. So we see a lot of everything, all the things, from rape to incest to intimate partner violence to also human trafficking. Um, I feel, and this is my opinion, that in the church and evangelical world, trafficking has become a really sexy issue. Everyone's gravitating toward this anti-trafficking organizations. Everyone wants to know how to end trafficking. Everyone wants to fund these trafficking organizations. Everyone wants to kind of, in a way, exploit the horrors of trafficking, which it is incredibly horrible. However, we also have to look at the ways that it can be prevented. So if we go down from the trafficking experience, not everyone is just like grabbed out of the beds and sold to a trafficker. That doesn't always happen, right? A lot of it starts in prostitution. A lot of it starts in foster care. A lot of it starts in unsafe households or unsafe situations where children are being groomed by predators because they have no one else to talk to, right? So there's many situations that cause this greater thing, but if we're only so focused on ending human trafficking, we neglect our neighbors, our friends, children among us, children in our churches that might be vulnerable to trafficking. And so I actually want to kind of help people understand that trafficking is not the only issue that is a problem in the world. If we're going to go even deeper, the issue is patriarchy and the abuses that happen within patriarchy. And so, what do we do? Well, yes, continue to fund the anti trafficking organizations, continue to fund the anti sexual violence organizations, continue to volunteer at the safe homes in your neighborhood, continue to give of your time and money in both local organizations and abroad, and consider fostering, consider adoption, consider um, after school programs and spending time and care and love and intentionality with children and young people that may not have anyone else to speak to. I think that's basic level. And so when you say people have limited time and resources, clearly we all have limited time and resources. But what can we do with the limited time and resources that we have? And what is the actual calling? What is the imperative? What is it that might be stirring in your heart that is imperative that you act on? That is the thing that you must create time and money for so that we can all work together in eliminating trafficking, sexual abuse, and sexual assault. And so,
Mhm.
another thing, I mean, if we go to the very underlying thing, like I said, of the patriarchy piece, right, is speaking up. When you see something is wrong, when you see that something is not fair, when you see that something is oppressive to women or other marginalized communities in your church or your school or your home, to speak up against it and ensure that the voices of the most marginalized are heard.
Mhm. And we have to be willing to take a hard look at our own organizations and clean house in our own spaces. I will see pastors supporting an anti-trafficking organization or going to an anti-trafficking march while they are harboring a sexual abuser on their own staff and covering it up. Because trafficking is out there, but we're sometimes not willing to confront the abuse that's happening in our own organization when our friends are the abusers.
Correct. Yeah, and this is why we have to look at the one in three again. You know, back to your analogy of a third of the congregation members. That it's all together. We're all in community and context with survivors. How do we listen better to those stories and undo the harms that are being caused?
Yeah, and remembering that we're in community with abusers, with people who have committed sexual violence, and we have to grapple with that reality as well. Our betrayal blindness can keep us from seeing that those who give us a job or a volunteer opportunity might actually be betraying us. And I see that as being one of the hardest things for the American church to confront. It's calling it out when we see it.
Hmm. Hmm.
What is one actionable idea that viewers can take away from this tonight to begin living a life of more meaningful advocacy with survivors?
Yeah, I would say the first is considering partnering with Freely and Hope and becoming a Hope Circle member from $10 to $100, whatever, per month. That is giving the essential resources that survivors need to thrive in their education and also in their own advocacy and healing journey as they become leaders in the community. It's one way. I think the second way is to explore the ways that your own community and your own family system, your own church, your own workplace can work to undo systems that have been violent. And as you explore what those things might be, tackle it. Have a conversation with the pastors, with the leaders. Maybe start a community group that establishes that sense of safety. Um, And if you're looking for resources, Seminary Now has this incredible course that we worked on together. And we also have other curriculum available from, like I mentioned before, the Made for PAX curriculum and the book, the Pendo's Power book that's coming out very soon. So the resources are there. I think what we might need to work together in is creating the time and effort and energy to engage in this very important topic so that we can heal um, the next generation that we are caring for and nurturing.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much, Nikole. I know this has been a heavy topic to consider. So I want to leave people on a lighter question to end with. And that is, can you tell us about your earrings and like just your personal style in general? You had such incredible wardrobe in the course. And
Oh,
I literally
yes.
like an hour before this event started, I was like, I wonder what earrings Nikole's gonna be wearing tonight because they're always amazing. So, like, where do you get your jewelry? And tell us just a little briefly about your personal style.
Oh, I appreciate that question. Well, these in particular are from South Africa. They are Zulu beads. The earrings that I'm wearing in the Seminary Now course are my favorite. They're made in Kenya. I designed it with a local artisan. You can get them on our website as well, freelandhope.org/slash shop. Um, and they're made out of Maasai beads from Kenya. Yeah, I always, when I'm buying pieces, I always want to ensure that I'm purchasing local and that I am, that I have, I don't know, some kind of like cultural story, like even here. So I'm in Maui now, as you said, and I have a little leaf earring that I bought locally from a local shop here. And then, yeah, textiles I love. I'm wearing a jacket from in the seminary course, a jacket that was made in Thailand, hand embroidered in Thailand, that my dad bought for me actually. So things like that. I always like want to ensure that wherever I'm going and how I'm showing up and what I'm wearing has a sense of symbolism. Where I'm bringing my friends in South Africa with me everywhere I go, and I'm bringing like local artisans wherever I go, and then I have pieces of brass or copper, which are indigenous to Zambia and Kenya, on me wherever I go as a memory that I'm not walking alone, but I'm actually carrying the stories and the gifts of other cultures that I'm blessed to collaborate with. So thank you for that question.
I love that. Yeah. I also love and I respect that you can take a lighthearted question and actually give us a really meaningful answer. So that's really beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
Nikole, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to say in conclusion?
Yeah, I feel like back to Sarah's question of, yes, we're always overwhelmed with the multitude of issues and stories and wow, trauma upon trauma that we hear in our families, in our communities, and on the news and in the world. It's really hard. And I know that when I started Freely and Hope, I felt the like pull to save all the things and all the people and to rescue all the things and all the people. And when it came down to it, I realized that I just had to support one person and that would have been worth it. And so if you have that one person in your life that you know is a survivor or that you know might be struggling with some complex trauma, perhaps the first level is to find care and friendship with them. Just one.
Mhm. Mhm. That's really powerful. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful evening, and we'll sign off for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.